Okay. Hello, everyone. My voice finds you again in the space-time continuum. I wanted to speak about how the future's greatness awaits your return. And there's something important about this idea. All right. Why should or can even a person say the future's greatness awaits our return? You know, I thought of something interesting. I thought of how reality is a sort of story that we indirectly are living in, and I thought about how the story is extended in time. And how everybody right now on this planet is under the consideration that we started from the past and we're going into the future. If we look at human beings and where their emotions come from, the human being is like this simple creature in a complex world, this capsule of knowledge encapsulated by an unknown universe. Most people, or let's have this as consideration, that the human being alive in 2022 is using an inner technology to actually be capable of experiencing an outer reality. We think we are just natural, and we feel like, technology came as a sort of unnatural add-on to our natural lives. There's been moments where I've poetically, in my writings, I've titled it The Lament of MW1897. And what I consider a lament to be is a song of a private sorrow, It's like there's some things that the world can see together, but there are some moments of life where it's as if your eyes are alone with the cosmos and there is no truth teller and there is no liar. We look at human psychology, emotions come from the past. How do they arrive from the past? The person has familiarity, the person has expectation on how reality happens, and when it doesn't happen that way, the person gets emotional. And it's another way of saying emotions are for a multidimensional being. Our minds, they see probabilities, and then we actualize these probabilities. So I'll give you an example. Imagine someone wants to give a talk and they expect that they're going to give a talk, and suddenly they're interrupted. And as long as they don't discontinue, the emotion that arises for them doesn't possess them. You see, it's the expectation of reality behind our eyes. We want the world to behave in a certain way. Everybody, it's like nobody's excluded. You know, we have this idea that saints and holy people were like selfless, and they weren't selfish, and they were so, compassionate. But let me tell you a secret. In any state of consciousness that has an individualistic framework is in some sense functioning over a selfish dominion. It's as if like it didn't matter if the guy was good, it didn't matter if the guy was evil. Both the good and evil guy had expectations on how reality should happen, and when it didn't happen, they got emotional. Isn't that hilarious? Our mind projects a map of reality, and when we can't find the treasure of the map of our inner realms, our outer realms panics. Pretty much the main idea for this episode, guys, is that I am maybe one of the few, I don't know who else is doing what I'm doing, but I think I'm one of the few human beings that, let's say out of 8 billion human beings who are considering that they are going from the past to the future. When it comes to the nature of the mind, it's as if I am an unborn futurist. What I mean by this is that I have this impression that my body is a system based on how the past goes into the future, but my mind, as its nature is to reveal, to make the unconscious conscious. You see, guys, our minds are working from their future. The mind is a future technology. And so, to get the idea out there, the potential of the present is not the potential of the past. It is also the potential of the future. Every moment of our life where we have judged and valued ourselves based on the past, it was only because there was content, there was an image. The human species is a strange event. It is the most bizarre thing fathomable, right? When I think about evolution, sometimes this might sound bizarre, but sometimes I think the animal was like, to evolve into consciousness was bizarre. It was one of the most strangest things that nature has done. Imagine the earlier we go back in time, we find, let's say, in the lineage of humanity, we find a creature that didn't have a spectrum of emotion. Pretty much like our super earliest ancestors didn't even know they were people. They were just creatures that were moving in accordance to the unconscious nature of reality. For the longest time, the environment was acting as mankind's commander. But for the first time, I shouldn't say for the first time, but the advantage to being someone that is alive in 2022. It's like nature separated from itself physically, then it's separated from itself ideologically, and then it, by becoming separate from the world, it created another world. You see, that's the nature of reality. You know, it's kind of like the hilarious argument that if metaphysical argument that if trees had souls, would their souls be the earth? That means, is the soul of a tree the soul of earth? Or let's say the spirit of a mountain. In ancient traditions, mountains were seen as giant beings, you know? For me, there is something that has decided to separate itself from everything. And by separating itself from everything, has created a new way to experience everything. What I'm trying to say is that the system that we find ourselves is beyond the reasons we can come up for. Our minds create models of reality, and then we allow these models to mesh with the outer realms. Right now, when I think about what does the world mean to me as a being, the world is left divided between a known past and an unknown future. You know, the title of this episode is a suggestion that are things happening just because of the past? Or could it be that the future self of humanity is a parallel life of humanity? In the subtitle I've written, from who am I to who I am. You see, the ancient yogis, they didn't know what was going on, and so they gave the steering wheel to the unknown. And humanity is acting like it knows what's going on, and it's giving the steering wheel to the linguistic simulation. It's like, what are the options of being a human? What are the options for human consciousness? It's either in a world where there is known relationships and information, or it's in an unknown reality. From the beginning of our lives, the greatest psychological decision has been where we put our confidence. I've noticed personally, anytime I have failed in this life, it has been because the past was more important than the future. But in anything where the future of the action was more important than its past, it's like we're so busy trying to be not good or like not evil people and only good people that we are forgetting it's an unknown intelligence in the universal sector. You see, dear viewers, what salvation can the voice of man in the void give to the ears of mankind? The only salvation is we use what we have and we envision the possibilities. Poetically, one can say, based on the dimensions that life can be perceived through, let's say every person has an unknown self. Let's say every person has a known self, which is their body. Let's say everybody has their mind, which is semi-known, semi-unknown self. And then they have their soul, which is their unknown self, their unknown life, and who their whole moment was before a part of their moment became the absolute definition. You see, I have this feeling that because the brain is using memory to be able to compartmentalize what is there in the present, it's like the brain that has had the ability to capture and record and archive past versions of self. It's as if, what if our brains got bored? I feel the way intelligence is that it finds itself existing in us in a limitation, in a space of limitation, and the purpose of life becomes the limitless quality. Right now, most people's desires, I could see someone I've never met, and just by hearing their problems, I can know what their desires are, And as long as there's desire, what does Buddhism say? The Buddha was like, it's like if you're attached to reality, dude, you will reincarnate, dude. I feel the human brain has matured to the point where it's no longer treating the past as a memory, but it is also treating the future as a memory. I feel the nature of human attention is that it is initially in an unknown presence. So more honest than saying I'm this kind of known human being with this name and this backstory and this and that, I think more honest than that would be to say I am an unknown presence, where the way my attention moves suggests the probabilities of reality that can activate. We human beings are believe it or not, on some level, such advanced beings, or let me say it this way, the mind of the human being is so advanced, right, that the word imagination is like ridiculous, Our minds, with the same instantaneity that we would like to, let's say somebody raises their hand in the air suddenly, with the same instantaneity you can move in the inner realms. The mystery of the soul has been that what is it that moves the mind before the body defines itself with the mind? I found it very strange. Even now, just, merely existing in the conscious waking state, for me, it's kind of like like a WOAH moment. It's one thing to wonder about what is the purpose of the human species. You see, it's the depth of the dimensions that our eyes accept for the world before we move in it. I can choose to see myself as a human being giving this talk right now because of the past. Right? I could be like, the past happened in a certain way, the present's happening in a certain way. It's like lots of stuff to say there. But really, the greatest, I would say, experiences I've had have been ones where it's kind of like I'm trying to use the past to prove how the present is already here. You see, I am a human being who, if somebody from the, somebody was like, okay, what kind of metaphysics do you have? I would say I have the metaphysics of someone who, when he was younger, through religion and New Age spirituality, I had a sort of, it's like when I was younger, I was a person who felt, he could not see angels, but he could notice angels, But all the angels, poetically, spirit guides, all the things that I thought were transcendentally assisting me, walking side by side, I realized that it's as if all my guardian angels were my future selves. It's like we think it's the time traveler that comes back from the future. We don't realize the nature of the mind that wants to make another decision on how to enter the future in the world is futuristic. You see, it's like when at some point I looked at religions and I'm like, no way, what the prophets of religions did is like what it's like a result that a time traveler from the future would want. It's like, why suddenly shift the behavior of all human beings? I feel intelligence in this unknown world will go through 3 phases. One phase is, you can say, the visible life. Right now, we as creatures appear in a visible world, which is kind of epic, right? The person's like, no way, because there's reality. I don't have to imagine everything from scratch, Reality is kind of like free imagination that you don't have to imagine. At some point in my own poetically romance with other worlds of possible life, I came into this conclusion that the human species has gone through a visible phase, will go through an invisible phase, and then will go through an inconceivable phase. And it's another way of saying the artwork is becoming the artist. That is the nature of the geometrical, it's like the nature of shape is to perform, but endlessly. You see? The cosmos, the changing world, it's like existence can't make up its mind on what it wants to look like, Really, we are not living in a physical world. We're living in a world where there are forces that suggest what is physical. We are actually like consciousness, as much as it thinks it's like matter, you know, in a cosmos. It's like a creature in a cosmos. Simultaneously, we are being the attention and space and in some sense the primary screen. So like what this means is that, imagine you go to the movies and you sit in a chair and you watch the film, and the whole time you're watching the film, even though you're, let's say, emotionally logged into or encapsulated by the film, like fascinated by the film, right? After the film finishes, the person is left in the cinema. And I think that really this projection of a sensory human life is a film. You see, it's like there's a greater way that our intelligence is being, that in lesser ways is undefinable. Really, what the spiritual, poetically, the spirit of secular society, the inspiration of, I would say, the analytical mind is to be accepted by infinity. Consciousness, due to having shape, wants the shape to continue. But if suddenly 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere realized that they were simultaneously each being a position, an origin of a universe. You see, our minds are not just where our personality dwells. Our minds are another extension of the living world. You see, it's like it's not just what is in our eyes that is, it's not just what's looking through our eyes that is alive. It's as if what is found to mean anything is based on the initial life force that has projected attention into the moment. There is a transcendental honesty that our species has yet to fully acknowledge. It's as if we have been multidimensional beings this whole time. And the species is like, no, you're either good or bad, or we don't care. You know, that's what the civilization 1.0 has done, right? Like, I'm not saying, like, of course, this world we live in, especially the intentions and the architecture of human civilization right now, it's one where effort and skill are actually suggesting value. You see, for me, I sometimes look at the, I guess, kind of like Emil Durkheim, I guess. It's as if when I look at the world, or when I look at a system, or this might sound bizarre, but for me, it's like, just like there's different organs in a body, each organ has a role. Like the heart, you know, beats, you know, like what I'm trying to say is, each organ of the body has a specific task that it must do. And sometimes when I look at human species and I look at the concept of normality, a part of me feels as if, like, is the world putting its head in a box and thinking that smaller world is everything? What it is that really, after the era of ego, you know, human beings wonder why, you know, I think especially going into the future, many human beings are going to wonder why their karma will feel unnatural. And let me tell you why. It's because if we are to truly be a natural being, we must identify with the force of change, with the change, rather than what is changing. True natural wisdom leads one into a dehumanized remembrance that before they were a person, or poetically, before the Atman, before the individual soul could do anything, even play with incarnation or reincarnation, it's as if there is a moment where the world is standing with a life of its own. That means this is something bizarre, but I think it's the greatest poetry, that this world of ours has a life of its own. It's alive in ways that only through the humble conscious engagements of communication. Literally, it's like if there are greater dimensions on this planet or in this world, just greater dimensions to the world, I feel that the honesty of advancing communication is in some sense the greatest strategy, right? Because on some level it's expectation based. You know, a lot of people on the planet, what was it, the World Health Organization was pretty much saying like the human species is becoming depressed. You know, it's not just people becoming depressed, the species is becoming depressed. And what does depression mean? You have accepted the inferior because you have felt the inferior had to be. You see, I remember when I was younger, I was incredibly shy, and sometimes due to, let's say, muscle memory, I'm still shy, right? Or experiential memory, I'm still shy. But I remember that the moment I realized everybody is in the middle of the nowhere was the moment where I freed myself from any judgment. Do you know? You know, imagine a human being in through, let's say, an Abrahamic story context. Let's say somebody goes to heaven, and I don't know if people know this, but in the Abrahamic vision of what happens, how one engages the afterlife, it's pretty much this idea that the person dies, and then, even though their body is dead, they resurrect in another dimension and then are judged. Right? What that means is like this world had a conclusion, even though it was unknown. See, that's the incredible thing. It's how far the romance of a metaphysical vision will go. When I say romance, guys, I mean like in the sense of like the same romance that an explorer has for unexplored worlds. It's as if sometimes you have to love the future in order to have the present become something else. You see, our eyes are becoming poetically the northern star of our bodies, our vision. And every human being, like imagine there were 8 billion, like this is hilarious, but I'll create a hypothetical situation. Imagine there were 8 billion there were 8 billion let's say advanced celestial interstellar beings, okay? And these 8 billion advanced interstellar beings decided that they were gonna all incarnate from the center of the planet to its surface, poetically. And so it's kind of like that, where it's like the ability of imagine 8 billion advanced unknown moments. Our fear of the unknown, you know, shackles the mind to shape. You know, on some level in the outer realms, a person has to be very serious with the conditions of reality. But behind one's inner realms, right, it's as if like a human being can physically move and a person can close their eyes, and it's like the way their mind moves is actually, they are like the spotlight on the stage, and different ideas, like different actors come and pass through the stage. You see, everybody's mind is working in accordance to how a potential of nature was sculpted, was conditioned. Like who I am right now is not just, let's say, my free will moving me in the moment. It is also everything my eyes have journeyed through. You know, it's like a child is born on this world, and every day it lives a simulation of Earth, right? Like when I think about my body, sure, it lived 100 years in one version of physical Earth. But if I think about my mind, imagine the person was like, you know, in one lifetime of 100 years, the person had 100,000 or let's say 100 million simulations of the Earth. That means ways that the world could be seen that hadn't yet. And you know, think of it this way, there are ways right now, whoever you are listening to me, that you could be using using your intelligence that nobody knows about. Well, do you know what I mean? That means novelty. Everybody is worthy of novelty. You know, let's say everybody from a religious context may not be worthy of a paradise, right? Like I have to some degree been fascinated by the geometry of how the ancients considered the idea of metaphysics. And I have realized it all comes down to how the human being is an energy, and the purpose of the free will is to move this energy. And really what enlightenment is trying to answer the question of how do we want to move in a world. Okay? Some human beings, they go and let's say you have an experience of oneness. You could be like, you could wake up and literally feel like your name is world. You know, that means you are the world. You could feel that. There has been moments even throughout these talks where I poetically feel like my soul becomes the whole moment, and I watch my body and mind happen through a trust of another world. You see, we are the most advanced technology to interpret any potential secrets of the realm, and the greatest secret could have just simply been this, that there is more ways to look at the world. You know, the person's like, I don't want to reveal the secret of the universe, but there's more ways to look at things, you know? That means the majesty of intelligence in a world, in the void, ultimately. Like, we're so casually like, yeah, we're living in a world as creatures, right? But we don't realize the world is in the middle of nowhere. Before human eyes, there was no necessity for a language to become the limit, the edges of truth. You see, we are an unknown force. We are like cavalry. Okay, so the way I, you know, sure, the biological evolution, an ape stood up, it had it with the smell, you know. The ape was like, for how long am I gonna smell the ground? And it stood up, you know. It suddenly had motivation. You know, I firmly believe that even though we say a person understands, right? But in reality, there is something, I would say, it's the spirit of understanding. That means the confidence of any sort of movement is occurring with an intelligence that has already been in the destination. It's as if before you drive your car, you know where you are driving. So poetically, before you use the mind to figure out truth, you are instantaneously knowing what you are. And my recommendation is reset the meaningless world through an unknown reality. The unknown is poetically the greatest gift of the gods, and what has separated, like really, what is a holy man and what is an unholy man? Like seriously thinking about these, right? As if what makes a person holy and what person makes a person unholy, and really what makes a person holy and unholy is based on their karma, which is how their eyes and their actions become a sort of sound heard by the cosmos, and the cosmos will choose to applaud or, you know, choose to shun, right? You know, who knows, right? Like maybe these Mr.Within talks I'm giving, right? Like at some point, some extraterrestrial, let's say, spaceship was passing by, and they're like, yo guys, something's happening on Earth. So, there's something going on, some sort of advancement of communication for us to care about. You see, guys, what I'm trying to do is say that the human mind has abstract access to abstract limitlessness, abstract, like the mind is given the great gift of infinite geometry, right? Like a person can look at something and be like, oh my God, I'm seeing an angel right now, or I'm seeing a demon right now. And then there could be people with geometrical eyes where they're like, I am not seeing a character in a story. I am seeing the shape of the living unknown world, right? As if this whole time the world has been alive and we have just noticed it, right? Like that's the difference. That's why in the Native American or I should say native in let me say it this way, in a shamanic perspective of someone, let's say in a Cherokee tribe, or someone in let's say back in the day where the spirit of nature was the value of the world rather than measurement, we don't realize that what capitalism is its mathematics. People who say they hate capitalism, it's like they're hating, they're not understanding it's a geometry, it's a system. Systems have intents. Intents are like the programs in systems. What I'm trying to say is that our relationship with the future of our species is a collective responsibility. And I guess, I don't know, maybe the cosmos had a need for someone to come and say this, Because there's moments I look at this world and I'm like, who am I? What do I know? I'm just an unknown being in an unknown world, right? And then I tell myself, it's like, if the world is so unknown, how dare I speak in the world? But then I realize all that the unknown can do is watch knowledge. You see, what is God is the unknown states of being. What is heaven? Right? Like heaven is for the body a location, for the mind. What is it? It's an emotion. There's the Zen story, which I mention often in these talks. There was this undefeated warrior in a battlefield. And this warrior was so undefeated, as if from the beginning of his life, the rhythms of his karma were untouchable. That means an undefeated person is a person that has never needed a reason to grow up. Do you know? And grow up from what? From the eyes that hold the world, you see? There was this undefeated warrior. He had an ego like a giant statue in the park, And so this warrior, undefeated in battle, this savage kind of like, the way this warrior fought was like, imagine like, if advanced AI learned Kung Fu. Sorry guys, I'm being silly. I'll go back to the story. There's this warrior, he's undefeated, he has a huge ego, even the king is, let's say, scared of him, The king's like, yeah, you could be the leader of my armies, Guy who's been undefeated in, let's say, 70 battles. Do you know what that means? That means that person was victorious before entering the battlefield. There's some people who fear death, and there's some people who just know when their eyes will become the world. consciousness is using the biological lifetime to lift off into another dimension where its true nature is limitless. This advanced warrior, in the last undefeated battle he has, okay, he suddenly kills an opponent, and for the first time ever, this idea comes to his mind. It's like this, imagine this juggernaut of a warrior, and he's killed so many people on the battlefield, but one time where he's killing someone, he's wondering, where is the soul going? Where is the life? It's as if these people are alive and then they aren't. So where is the life going? You know, where's the soul going? So he wonders about the concept of the afterlife and the concept of heaven and hell, and this warrior, let's say imperial warrior, undefeated warrior, he looks at his assistant and he says, find me, you know, where the wisest man in the world is, right? And the assistant goes into the market and says, hey, anybody know the wisest man in the world? But anyways, the assistant tells the warrior a location, and the imperial warrior goes and finds this monastery on top of a mountain. And this warrior has such an intensity of a conviction in himself, right? Because in modern times we I shouldn't say misunderstand, but we misascribe masculinity into like a sort of raw expression, but on some level a dimension of reality is only like our minds are antennas, meaning that they pick up the world but they don't hold all of it. This warrior, you know, he just, you know, goes into the monastery, and even the door is afraid of the warrior. The door just suddenly opens. And so this warrior, imperial warrior, who's wondering about heaven and hell, goes into this monastery, and there's the Zen master, you know, in a Zen tea ceremony with all his disciples, you know. Imagine you're having tea and like an imperial warrior storms into your monastery, you know. And you're like, man, we were all about to, you know, experience pure emptiness. Like, as if, like, think about how insane is that like when the imperial warrior steps into the monastery, all the disciples and the Zen master are all practicing emptiness. So imagine, okay, I'll say this way. You know, living in anywhere in the world has its sound effects, you know. But anyways, the Zen master's teaching his disciples. They're having a silent Zen tea ceremony. This warrior, you know, enters the room and he just commands. Imagine somebody who's undefeated. They pretty much think they are God. Their ego has been kept as in an authority position, right? So this warrior goes in and he says, sage, tell me now, what is heaven and hell, right? And the sage is like, buddy, can't you see I'm drinking tea over here? He says, sage, tell me what is heaven and hell. And the sage, he pauses, and he says, you're too stupid, savage, and too much of a goon, G-O-O-N, too much of a goon for me to tell you, give you wisdom. And this imperial warrior, he's been undefeated in battles. Nobody has ever disrespected him. And out of nowhere, right, this Zen master, you know, feeble Zen master is calling him an idiot. Right, imagine a warrior, like an imperial warrior, coming and saying what is heaven and hell, right? And the Zen master just looking at him and being like, you're an idiot, man, you know? And so this imperial warrior, what happens to the ego that, and let's say a victorious ego that begins to taste defeat, right? Rage comes in, literally a backup system behavior to, like, before it's like the human intelligence stops, there's the spirit of rebellion is there. Anytime we naturally know something is deserved, there's a spirit, poetically the spirit of rebellion is present in the moment, right? So it's like the rebellion of the self's authority against the world, right? A person who's just victorious, they think that their self is the world, right? This is why endless celebrities are paying for therapy, evidently. Because they become gods, but they become gods of small universes, not realizing that there's a greater mystery to human intelligence. So this imperial warrior says, "How dare you speak to me in this way, and I will show you who I am." And he takes his sword and he raises his sword in the air as if with one strike, he's going to end the moment. And right before, in this rage and wrath and kind of like I don't know if people know this about Genghis Khan, right? But Genghis Khan was somebody who, when he invaded other kingdoms, he would be saying to the other kingdoms that he's the wrath of God. Can you imagine that as a militaristic tactic used back in the day, where an emperor is invading everybody and saying, I'm the wrath of God, right? Genghis Khan said that shit, but I'm saying this guy in the story has a similar mindset, right? It's as if when you have been the king of your own world for too long, how dare that kingdom be changed, right? That's the nature of, let's say, the blind ego. Without compassion, the mind cannot access greater dimensions because it can't trust the world, right? The person's like, what do I do in the middle of the void? Do I consider the world as my ally, or do I consider the world as my enemy? And it's so remarkable, by just where your attention is pointed, your karma happens. Before the sword kills the sage looks at looks at the warrior who's about to kill him, and he says, "This is the door to hell." And right before the sword lands on the head of the sage, right, something in the warrior, in this, let's say, berserker ego, let's say, of a person, like something in his soul moves, as if the Zen master found a way to pierce through all that wasn't the student. Do you know? And in that moment, he suddenly realizes that heaven and hell are not locations. They are states of mind that that give qualities to the location. Samsara is a training ground. Literally, we are like multidimensional beings in training through a dualistic dimension of, let's say, the human story. It's like somebody looks at, let's say, okay, let me finish this story. So the moment the guy drops his sword, so he realizes what the sage says, and he drops his sword and he bows. He puts his head on the ground as if, I accept that I can't see, right? He becomes humble. And in that moment, the Zen master, it's like takes a sip from his tea, and he's like, this is the door to heaven. What that means is the greater dimensions of this world don't need an intense, complex, evil access point. Violence is a lesser game, and violence is how nature was looping savagely, So what it is it's kind of like a person, like imagine you're someone who you go in the mirror, you know, you look at yourself and you adjust yourself. So similarly, imagine you're someone who goes and looks in the mirror, but you're not adjusting your physical self. You're wondering about what sort of quality of intelligence does your moment truly deserve, right? What does the human species deserve? Have we forgotten, you know, the might behind this question? That imperial warrior, undefeated in so many outer battlefields, in an inner battlefield he was defeated. He realized that sometimes the burden that comes with victory, right, is that we don't get to see who else we were, right? That's the thing about good karma. If somebody makes a case and says, hey, is good karma actually bad karma, right? Right? In reality, karma is occurring not just based on our actions. It's occurring based on our awareness to everything that's going on. That means there's some beings on the planet right now where, you know, they go through life, but they don't have karma. And somebody would say, why? You know, it's like, why, Mr.Within? Why are there some people on the planet who don't have karma? And I'll tell you why. Because they are not a self to themselves anymore. It's not just the evolution of a physical intelligence. It's also the evolution of redesigning the geometry that is being the context of the world. Now imagine somebody honors their past. Let's say you, whoever you are listening to me, let's say you've had instances in this life where you have honored the past. The way we honor the past is by keeping it alive in our mind, right? A person can say, you know, I love my ancestors, but I don't know who they were, you know. I feel what novelty is like a future self remembering how the present should happen, okay? I feel that there's 4 dimensions. It's something when I think about what can happen to a character in a story, 4 possibilities arise. One possibility is that the world is destroyed, there is no character, there is no story. One possibility is that it stays as a character in a story. Another possibility is that it realizes that its one story is actually being experienced as 2 stories, right? It's like we have 2 eyes that see the same. We are simultaneously being the intelligence of the body and the intelligence of the mind being the same moment. So the 2 eyes seeing the same moment algorithm applies, right? The person realizes, no way, just like I have been my body, I have been the presence of how my awareness reveals its own edge, you know? You know, there was a scholar who said, you know, who brought this term called the awareness of awareness. And the awareness of awareness is instantaneous, and because it's instantaneous, it cannot be dual, so it is non-conceptual. The truth that humanity has been seeking has been one which is beyond the programming of what it sees. You know? You know, we can have this view that reality is a world where it's going from the past to the present to the future, right? Or we could just also see it from the present, right? There was this crazy author, I don't remember his name, I don't even know what book it is, but I remember somebody talking about him, where there was this author, I think it was Terence McKenna was talking about. He said there was this author who had suggested this bizarre plot to the human story, that all of everything in the 2000s was actually still happening inside a computer in 1984. You know? As if something in those lines, where the past is simulating the present and the future. Then there's a view where it's the present simulating the past and the future. And you know what it means? It's another way of saying the way matter is experiencing space is timeless. So matter has a way of being in the space which is prior to time. We as human beings, we may not have the conscious memory, but it's there in our unconscious that before we had a name and we were a personality, we were just a moment of sight. We were like a candle in a room that hadn't started glowing yet, you know. Everything honestly comes to the future of the vision of humanity. That's it. And because we are human, now is the only time to think about, you know, it's like think of it this way. It's as if, like, where has the past been happening and where has the future been happening? Then the ultimate mystery is how is the present being the present? That means all those people in the New Age community being, you know, pulled towards the here and now. What is the here and now? The here and now is where the potentials of the future, you know, await. Right? It's as if the person's like, imagine somebody was seeking enlightenment and they suddenly got enlightened. And they're like, no way, now that I'm enlightened, I'm not looking for enlightenment, but then what is the purpose of the enlightenment? Right? And it's kind of like the task of, let's say, the invisible other. It's as if what the Logos seems to be doing is that there seems to be a symbiosis of karma. You see, it's like we are thinking the planet is not alive, right? We think the planet is just an object, you know? But in actuality, we are being an object, and our life is being what is moving this object. So to see something as alive is to discover an unknown way it is moving. So anything that has an ability to move in an unknown way, sophisticated unknown way, should not be killed. It's as if it's like just like some ancient trees shouldn't be cut in the forest, right? Similarly, it's like there's moments in life that should not be forgotten, you know? It's so easy to think of that the person could be like, yeah, I'm a soul, why should I care about anything the mind and body does? And the idea is that true courage for the mind is to be capable of experiencing its most advanced vision. That's it. Right? It's like what is the greatest way to unlock the intelligence of a species? Have every human being wonder about how all the worlds they are seeing, how is it held? And in some senses, Papaji says, you know, it's like, when will this be realized? As Papaji says, you are the unchanging awareness where activity takes place. From the inefficiency of the worlds we couldn't trust to the efficiency of the worlds we have to trust, it's like me giving this talk is like one antenna, like, giving a signal to all the other antennas, What the purpose of language is to, in some sense, be the bridge of how would I say it? It's like languages are portals. Like a word suddenly, it's like, imagine a portal where one side of the portal it's like a letter and the other side of the portal it's an image. Like when I say the word apple, right? So it's like from one end the letters are being the object, from another end, right, the image of the object is being the letters. True experience has to do with being like, okay, if I'm alive once, I might as well get to know what the ultimate eyes of the species could be. Because, Lao Tzu in The Art of War, he says somebody who is victorious before stepping into the battlefield wins. That means somebody who knows what to do survives, in a way, tunnels through the karma of the moment in ways that, let's say, somebody how would I say it? Every human being is being an unknown traveler in the space-time continuum. On some level, our biology grants us membership into the advancement of humanity, the human species. But at the same time, the nature of our minds, it's like because we have different DNAs, every human being is being a simulation, being a part of reality that has never happened before. Sometimes I think about the concept of fame, and I think about like the idea that existence is the greatest fame. That everybody actually, because we identify as existence, the continuity of existence becomes the pilot of the soul. There's some human beings right now who, it's as if are like actors. Like, to be a human being in an unknown world is like to be an actor in let's say a play or a film that one is not directing. The person's like, does it matter if I believe in let's say the laws and scientific forces of, let's say, the four major forces? It's like the person's like, okay, should I choose to see geometrical shapes be an interpretation of reality, which really is what science is? It's like the accuracy of the shape of the reality's potential movement. Imagine what it would feel like to be like let's say, some kid who's in a village back in the day and is like going to get water from the well at night, right? And suddenly it looks in the sky and imagines sees a giant phoenix, and he silently sees this giant phoenix flying in the sky, in the dark sky. And imagine the phoenix he sees, the flames of the phoenix are like the same light as the moon. And so it's as if imagine seeing something so greater than you and everything that is happening in just now, right? It's like when you get to see the future, you realize what humanity always deserved. You see, we're reaching a time where human psychology has to be reset. We need new ideas, in the sense that the new ideas will grant a freedom that the past didn't. See, the idea is that the smartest generation gives freedom first, right? Imagine all the dictatorships on the planet. Let's say they can all be resolved if the future generations come in power and they just decide on a different idea to be the value of the human being, right? If we treat human beings like farm animals, then sure, like I think people don't understand what's happening in the country Iran, right? It's like the government is shepherding. It's like treating human beings like, you know, like a lesser species. It's a sort of, do you know, it's like, it's the bizarre nature of dualistic reality, where chaos and order have a ratio, they have a relationship, they have a sort of symmetrical relationship. I remember I created a perfect story to explain this in previous episodes. I said, imagine there was a good kid and an evil kid, like a chaotic kid and an ordered kid, right? And the chaotic kid and the chaotic kid, let's say, hits the ordered kid. The ordered kid, in some sense, goes and tells his older brother, right? So imagine like a young order, a young child of order, and how do I say it? I'm trying to say, imagine like there's this sibling scenario where this good kid brings his older brother, who's like the archetype of evil amplified, and the good kid brings his older brother, which is the idea of order amplified. So what I'm trying to say is that our actions have a consequence, but how fast their consequence happens suggests if cruelty can be a thing. You know, sometimes I wondered why saints and sages in human history, they were so compassionate to the world, right? There was a time where I felt very intensely like, does the human species deserve compassion, right? Like I was literally like, as if imagine you want to write an essay on, you know, this. For a second, my mind fathomed like, what does this species deserve? And you know what I realized? I found it in my laughter. You know, I found it in a moment where the moment was free before it could not be. That's how I found the idea of the advanced civilization. You know, suddenly it's like, you know, it's like the, you know, imagine a light bulb powered by 10,000 suns suddenly just goes, turns on in your mind. You know. That's how the advanced civilization, the idea felt. The first time I started to care about that idea. 8 billion creatures on a rock. And let's consider that our future self is great, you know. Let's say, you know, I just have this attitude change, and I'm like, we've already built an advanced civilization in the future, so that I can just appreciate the future's greatness. Do you know? But why is it that the future's greatness awaits the return of the individual? You see, in a religious context, there was the journey of a creature in an unknown world kind of going back to its creator, right? But I'm saying, imagine the creator of the world is the future. So you know what it is? It's as if a being in the future is simulating itself in the past. Human consciousness is like, it's a game. The future, like what the logos is the future of the species, which is timelessly present now, intervening with the present, you know? This is a heavy episode, yeah. But you know, it's a cool time to be alive. You know, there was a time I thought, it's like, if I could go into the past, which era of human history would I like to live in, right? And I thought I'd probably go back to the era where, you know, the battle of kingdoms would occur. You see, it's all about the nature of our own attention. These yogis back in the day, they saw everything had a nature. Like my laptop right now has a nature. You know, me as a person, I have a nature. And what a nature means, it means that there's, on a natural level, we are designed to receive the world in a certain way. And if we don't receive it in that certain way, we're being ignorant, right? So it's kind of like we've reached that time where all the self-help books of the future are just going to be taking responsibility for our future lives. But it's trying to solve the problem of, if the species, let's say we found a way to not go extinct as a species, we'll be like, okay, so we're not going extinct, but what's the point? You know, it's like, it's not enough to just build a backup system against extinction, but one must, in some sense, remind the civilization on Earth why its eyes are designed to look up. The skies are our teacher for the future generations. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if people start worshiping the sky in the future at some point, you know. As if the sky was the honest part of the reality, you know. It's like the world didn't lie to us, you know, when in some sense it was happening on such a massive scale. Imagine a podcaster believes in God, and so they're like, wait a minute, is God hearing my podcast, right? And the reason I'm saying that, okay, is because I'm just trying to create this context that we paint the empty canvas of the moment with tensions appear from our energy. You know, sometimes I feel like, am I riding karma like a horse? You know, as if am I riding towards in an unknown battlefield? You know, because the mystery of who we are, it could literally transcend the human idea. You know, it's like, imagine somebody went to an enlightened, you know, guru and was like, hey, enlightened guru, does space have a soul? And in reality, there's no answer, because it's like the world from one end is like is a journey through the mountain of time, but on the other end, it's as if it's just being witnessed. So when I honestly wonder who I am as a being, I'm just being here as some sort of energy. It's like, who am I existentially? The periodic table, you know? Who am I experientially? You know, the character in the story of my life. Who am I? Or in some sense, how is the visible and invisible being inconceivably witnessed? That's the true fascination of the unknown, right? It's like, for me, the only enlightened guru was the concept of the unknown. In a world where knowledge is like a limited simulation, it's like we gotta at some point realize, you know, the boxes we've put on our heads, right? Like the species is hiding from its future greatness because it feels it doesn't deserve it based on the past it has lived, right? It's like, what is redemption but an ability to walk in a new way? You know, imagine we woke up one day and, you know, all news stations were like, it's like, for the first time in history, the species has broken the record of how many inventions new inventions were created, let's say, in 2022. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm saying, like, people don't understand how incredible it is to be in that point in history where one can get to see how an advanced civilization happens. You know, that is the true gift of our ancestors. I always wonder, it's like why, it's like the person's like, not just who, you know, what am I living for, but what has every human being that has walked this earth been living for? The common denominator to all human archetypes is the future. Any person that can realize that the future is like how the unknown reveals itself, it's how the unconscious becomes conscious. But that means, in some sense, consciousness is not consciousness. Truth seems to be a search for the perfect geometrical shape, but in reality, space is like the evolution of geometry. You know, imagine you were a being that was capable. I feel this is really what the nature of our minds are like. Imagination is happening in Plato's world of forms. What the mind is like imagine like because I'm in Canada, it's like a beaver bringing its head out of the water. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like we are a creature that has access to one physical dimension, but this physical dimension is being sculpted by an internal dimension. That internal dimension has shape because of certain, let's say, existential dualities. And it's kind of like, you know, true mysticism is hilarious because it's like, what is breathing in a moment that was never here? Right? The mystery of consciousness. It's like truth. If somebody says it's truth beyond the human idea, I'll be like, that's a smart man. You know, that's a smart person. The smartest people are not looking for photographs of truth. The smartest people on the planet are actually, in some sense, watchers of how moments move. This is really intelligence. Okay? And when I say intelligence, everybody's different, right? It's like everybody's different instrument. And my understanding of the mind is that the mind, if you have a purpose for it, of using it, of even considering it, the mind is like how the human being, when it's in a blissful moment, its inner realms suddenly shift out of an ideologically centric reality into a more of how the moment is just being the moment. You see, guys, it's the refusal of the acceptance of the simplicity of truth that makes us, you know, for eons loop in, let's say, abstract realities. You see, it's like there's something so simply being here that what can we say, you know? It's like the person who tried to believe in the simplest moment of life and realized the simplest moment would be a moment too simple to change. What is really going on is just to keep the word alive, it's like an unknown soul, like an unknown force, is receiving information from the body and then in some sense using it. So it's like our body is here to connect the world to that inner space where an unknown viewing intelligence is moving it. That unknown viewing intelligence, it's as if I'm kind of saying the timeless self of the creature in time is already the destiny of the future. You know, I'm saying that it's like because we can envision how advanced civilization can become, that energy has a road to walk on, to really like, let's say there's so many humanitarian efforts on the planet, people trying to save the world, but we gotta first have the capability as a species to discriminate between our own world and the actual world that is here. It's like, contrary to popular belief, truth was never an idea. In other words, anybody looking for truth, you will most likely suddenly find an unknown experiential moment. Pretty much 8 billion creatures that are trapped in their own worlds, which are simultaneously living in one world. It's as if we need to have the capability to discriminate between our inner realms and outer realms. Anybody who can discriminate between the inner realms and outer realms is actually being like a being where their edge is like the whole moment. It's like all ideology is trying, it's like consciousness is using information to prove to itself how it is conscious, only to realize that it's conscious instantaneously. So like the mystery of consciousness leads to an instantaneous mystery. Pretty much consciousness, the concept of consciousness cannot exist on some level. That means it doesn't mean anything. Because language is a simulation of reality. And to seek a truth in language is like you're trying to be true in accordance to a simulation. I have wondered, what is the most important thing about the world? And it's as if the past wanted to get to the future, the present wants to get to the future, and the only thing the human being is not doing is to become responsible for its future. That's really, I think, what people deep down want to see, a civilization that is not denying its own advancement. There was a time people looked at objects and they're like, yeah, this rock is truth, this rock is God, right? And imagine somebody, they went from idol worship, object worship, to subject worship. And the way the human being is surviving in Civilization 1.0 is through an act of subject worship, but it's self-subject worship. So what does that mean? That means we are thinking that to be a human being means that the idea of ourself has to be a specific shape in every moment. What meditation really is like to put the story of your mind on pause and just Watch the moment make the first move. You'll see divinity that way. We are headed for an era where I would say celebration cultures and an era of sort of universal compassion will arise. There's like even compassionate philosophers, just like Mother Teresa was saying, let's care for all living beings, It's like the philosophers, just like the saints of old who preached compassion and love. The philosophers were saying, can the human being love its ability, its potential ability to experience infinity? Do you understand? We're in a geometrical realm. The speed of how this geometry changes is suggesting how the nature of our minds. Imagine in a theological parallel universe, Adam and Eve, who had made a mistake, and had fallen from the heavens, the Garden of Eden, to earth, and were, had to be tested to return, to be worthy of returning. Imagine in a parallel universe, Adam and Eve, the first day they were on earth, they lived in such an incredible way that they instantly, the next day, they just went back. What I'm trying to say is that it's like the mystery of human psychology and how its limitations define it, or should its limitlessness define it. It's like philosophers, like saints, preach compassion of the geometry of an idea. You see, it's like philosophers are people who still, it's kind of like they love language because they see beyond it. It's like on some level, we don't want to hurt the world that took a long time to get here. But at the same time, we are the potential of the world. We are the pilots of the human species, We are the crew members of how Buckminster Fuller, Marshall McLuhan, they would say spaceship Earth. The moment the context becomes universal, the ego, greed, cruelty, and desires of a planetary self, they fade, It's as if our suffering evaporated in the light of a greater vision. It's as if the world had too much greatness to ignore, for that greatness to be ignored. So I'm just saying, whoever's listening, as a human being, there's strategies of approaching the moment based on the past. There's strategies of how you even move in the present. But really, in order to build an advanced civilization, behind our eyes, we need to, just like Sun Tzu says, it's like victory, be victorious before you can even be defeated. So similarly, if 8 billion human beings just cared to see what the most advanced way a civilization can happen or look like, why is consciousness being a world? If we experience reality in time, which is an inner simulation overlaid on an outer reality, it's kind of like we go from a world that had time in it to a world where From the freedom of space comes an ability to move in a different way. What is that great vision within the hearts of all human beings, waiting to kind of roar in the modern world, right? We just, what it is? It's as if the future is going to become an incredibly skillful place. I wouldn't be surprised that the human technology becomes so fast that there will be suits made. Like, imagine Iron Man suits that can instantly teleport. So if they teleport fast enough, it's as if they are in the world, but they're not visible in the world, right? How our intelligence is moving in the moment, and what inspires it, and what it's actually being. That means, imagine something that could never be taught. It was just at some point, the unknown soul would wonder about the purpose of knowledge. What is the meaning of life? Is it to be emotionally satisfied? Is it to be intellectually satisfied? Is it to be biologically satisfied? Or was there something more? Was there a hidden song of greatness, behind, the folly of the world that was being worshipped? The problem with civilization 1.0, or I would say civilization 2.0, will arise when the human beings on the like any human being in any sort of, let's say, human civilization, when it becomes important, it's like that's when, I don't know how to say it. It's as if we're not just waiting for the past's victory, we are in some sense being the future's victory. Who knows? Like, if people were, let's say, 10% more kinder, maybe like the quality of reality changes. Really, it's like we're alive once. How do we want this journey of sight to, in some sense, unravel? We went from a foolishness of a chaotic and ordered being to the greatness of an infinite, multidimensional being. You see, infinity is not something to be feared. Even the idea of immortality is not something that even the concept of fear can apply to. But in reality, it's a sacrifice of the quality of one's. It's kind of like, how is my body? It's like I'm saying, in the future, the species could just transfer consciousness into a robotic continuity. Like, in the future, we could be like robots acting human. Like, all bodies of beings in the species has become robotic, imagine. What does the body deserve? What does the mind deserve? And poetically, what does the soul deserve? I think deep down, everybody acknowledges emptiness. And what emptiness means is that the spirit of the moment stops moving, I'm trying to see in what other angles can I share my opinions on the topic. I could see that the concept of paradise, it's like Adam and Eve entering, or let's say the legacy of Adam and Eve from the Abrahamic tradition entering paradise. It's as if like Adam and Eve are already in paradise, but they don't realize it. It's as if it's another way of saying Earth is in paradise. So it's this bizarre thing that before, in our inner realms, we need to realize Earth is in a paradise. And in front of our eyes, we need to realize we need to build paradise on Earth. The paradise is in Earth. We are the eyes of the soul considered supreme. Right, so what it means is that intelligence, the ability to be aware of existence, was through the past considered. It's like it was greatness was God's hand moving the steering wheel of human history. But what is God? It's an inconceivable source. And what is the future? At least we know the future is inconceivable. And this episode is pretty much saying, are we sourced out of the future? That means the soul that they say is beyond the object and subject, beyond the mind and body. It's as if is our timeless self, omnipresently victorious. Shall we see a species that realize there's uncharted territory in front of our eyes and behind our eyes? Can you imagine a point where, I really hope civilization goes this way, right? I'm like someone pointing somewhere with this podcast, and I hope the species, at least looks at where I'm pointing, Consciousness is breathing as its own truth. It's as if like I'm thinking, what's the most important thing that the attention of the human species needs to go towards? And it's how before we return to the unknown, we got to see the advanced potential of the known, It's like when a person wants to truly get to know what kind of intelligence they have, they actually have to stop being anybody, even stop being their self, and just be present. And when the person is present, they realize their mind can have a non-conceptual trust with the direct experience of the moment. It's hilarious. It's like our eyes are creating the road, they are seeing the road, they're walking on the road, but they're also being the road. Attention is divinity in the void. How attention moves is poetically our soul. So the future's greatness awaits your return if you realize that your mind has an ability to acknowledge how reality is unknown. By being unknown, it has a permission. It's kind of like when it's like a person who has failed can only succeed afterwards, Let me tell you why. It's because it's like the failure is the definition. When you fail, you can't go below the failure anymore. It's as if one edge of the spectrum, the fear of falling, goes away when you have fallen. But realizing the feeling of rising, right? For me, it's like I don't know how to say it in the most, let's say, secular, proper way. Some invisible force, is going to move the species in a way where it realizes that if the mind is an instrument, what is its greatest melody? All I'm doing in these episodes is just equipping, hopefully, the human species with algorithms, right? With ways that attention can move. We are explorers of an unknown world, If the search for truth destroyed us before we could realize truth, it's as if, let's say somebody's mind can fathom parallel realities to human history, and so let's say that person for a moment is like, okay, let's say you see parallel realities that are inefficient. Like my mind can just like I can envision how advanced this civilization, like the potential of the present can be, but I can also envision how chaotic it can be. There's even certain views on chaos I've had, like philosophical views on chaos, where I've just abandoned the idea. I just stopped touching the idea, But there is a depth, there is another side to the world, where it's like the answer to the question of why are good and evil fighting? Why isn't every conscious, energetic agent in the universal sector not contributing to the great vision of humanity? You see, it's as if the greatness of our species is how it chose to walk in the void. So it means, like I'm just saying, if we put the word advance in front of everything, then we get a sense of that everything can advance literally, It's strange. All destinations are how attention is held. It's kind of like when you realize there's something unknown going on the planet, at some point it's like no idea can touch that unknown. I feel that the future's greatness is the potential it has bestowed the present. I feel just the fact that one human being, or let's say a bunch of human beings, could look at the world and see advanced versions of it, it's as if that's a sort of karmic declaration of why an idea deserves to exist, you see. There was this European writer by the name of Victor Hugo, and he says nothing is more powerful than an idea in which its time has come. And in the stumblings of civilization 1.0, I'm in some sense telling the species, you are worthy of an advanced civilization. Because when else can we build one? It's like every moment should simultaneously be an effort towards the hidden victory of the collective. So imagine advanced multidimensional tolerance. That means the ability to, it doesn't matter if you're looking at a, let's say, bird, or you're looking at a human being. It's kind of like the unknown dimensions. It's as if staying true to the potential of the unknown behind the eyes of any living creature, And really what the greatness of the future is like in our minds, we are already can envision an advanced civilization. We just have to build it in the outer realms. Like right now, I can envision like hover cars, but we just need to build it, as a species. So what I'm saying is, like, by being able to see the geometry of how the world can happen behind our eyes, just by that geometry existing, there is an argument for why a specific vision deserves to continue. From the savageness of a, let's say, cruel nature, dishonest nature, that means that wild animals didn't have a concept of honesty, you know. Honesty is the privilege of a mind that is trying to, it's like an intelligence that rather than trying to constantly battle, the intelligence is just, how would I say it? You acknowledge how you are being a type of being in the moment that is just like whatever idea I have on what myself is, it's as if it's watching all those ideas. It's like who I really am is watching every idea I've ever had, and that's how the memory, it's like the free will is deciding in accordance to an access of the intelligence to multiple versions of itself. That's the genius of the brain, you know, it re-simulates. You know, right now the species is in an era of language worship. When it gets out of there of language worship, when we step beyond the linguistic simulation, you know, when life is suddenly becomes more than a story. As our eyes find themselves, you know, on the original earth, it's kind of like wondering what the greatest potential of the world and it's like you're wondering about the greatest potential of a self, but the self is based on the world, so the self is wondering about the greatest potential of the world. And the greatest potential of the whole world is a potential where we cannot continue as observers of, you know. There's so many things happening in nature where we choose how long we carry it in our attention, you know. Every person has their own style of utilizing consciousness, you know. To be a human being is like to be like what consciousness feels like. It's like a bird on a branch of time, and the bird can at any point fly off the branch, you know. It's this strange view that the soul in any moment can act as if the body and mind never existed, you know. Like that's I'm talking about the sort of mystical experiences where the person has trusts the unknown when it comes to how their moment moves. You know, it's kind of like you thought you had a name and you realized you're an unknown being and activity in nature. Like that's the poetry of the soul. You know, what would primordial victory look like? You know, mystics were like, who am I? You know, they started from the question of like, okay, what's here? But finally, when you realize you are the unknown, the ability of the unknown is to move the known, you know. It's kind of like to be a human being is have an unknown force move the known body, but we just give that unknown force a name. The brain is acting like it can understand itself, pretty much, right? But it comes to a realization of the limits of how much the mind can simulate, and then it discovers the unknown. So it's kind of like, what does the body, mind, and soul have in common? The body is found in an unknown world. The mind is an unknown intelligence, and the soul is an unknown witness. The unknown is poetically, you know, a state of the timeless self. Believe it or not, in Japanese, like anime shows like DBZ, right? There's these characters that like the character powers up to a level where it's called ultra instinct. That means it's like in some sense, it's as if the primordial intelligence. Imagine somebody activates primordial power. That means it's like in their human life, they were the spirit of all worlds at once. You see, what it is like on some level, our name and personality maps reality in a certain way, but then there's the unknown viewer within. And rather than fearing our minds, it's as if we should care to understand anything that's happening in a moment. What is the purpose of freedom? Freedom is to be capable to look at everything at the same time. Freedom is a concept that only an infinite psychological entity, like if infinity, it's like for the psychology of an infinite being, An infinite being would be like a human being where time exists but is not important. And so the inner realm's free. It's kind of like your mind is how you're a pilot of your own soul, and there is no truth other than how it's like if truth is considered as an instantaneous revelation, truth becomes how the truth of nature becomes how our eyes are before there is ideology, infusing in our sight, right? There is a way where every human being, if they just sit down for, let's say, 10-20 minutes silently somewhere, and you're just being present in the silence, right? You're going to, after some time, realize your consciousness continues as the whole moment, but your mind doesn't need to be an idea. So when you realize you're not a creature of just shape, you are an intelligence that is the space where the creature even is allowed to move. So on some level, it's like the permission of our energetic intelligence leads to the conscious decision making. That means the human species it's going to be hilarious, right? It's like, people are going to try to find like a formula to explain the whole cosmos. And we're going to be like, we're not even but physical beings, It's like being human consciousness is starting from a position where it's being conscious experience is being an existential projection, right? Or I should say it this way, unconscious existence is being conscious experience. What the advanced civilization is an advanced expectation from the most advanced state of mind. When we live for the future, a part of us acts as if the future already exists, right? But what I have realized is ultimately it's seeing 8 billion potentials of intelligence. I'm pretty much seeing a bunch of creatures on a rock that have not realized that their collective unity would lead to a greater sort of a celestial chapter of humanity opening up, right? Where it's as if a sort of fascination, you know what it is? It's kind of like it's like the era of sky cities. You know, when sky cities happen, human psychology will realize the earth is just a place. You know, imagine, a philosopher of politics. Okay, guys, I think I'm running out of energy for this talk. Like, I don't know. Future greatness, consciousness deserves to utilize, the discovery of what the future is. If children in educational system, like in middle school, were not taught the past, but were in some sense taught the future. It's like, why is the candle flame of consciousness illuminating an unknown world? Why is our attention present? Like, if the mind is not an object, but it moves the object, it's kind of like our mind is being our body when it moves it. We have come to a point where truth, the search for a singular truth, has come to a sort of unknown witness. We are the watchers of every concept that will ever arise in this realm. We are the unknown watchers of our own known lives. If the future is great, then the possibility of that greatness means that it's like that greatness can happen, right? People don't have just beliefs on reality, they have beliefs on abstraction. For me, the question of what is the world, on some level, sure, physical event. On another level, okay, sure, a linguistic, psychological event. And then on another level, the moment is silently watching itself, right? It's as if we have been the one that has been judging. It's as if the invisible, unchanging witness of the moment. The invisible, unknown witness of the moment is actually the true nature of how the body and mind move. To be a human being is like to have an ability to remember the advancement of your soul, right? It's as if there's games of the body, games of the mind, and poetically the games of how unknown worlds are happening at the same time. At least the species has found a way to turn sight into a voice with image, It's like our species has a cruel past, so we're wondering, does it deserve a good future, a great future? And then at the same time, we see the species has potential for, let's say, art and humor, you know? It's like as long as there is ability, there seems to be purpose for the ability, you know? It's like consciousness is a power that the world has, you know? We are being like solar powered, mirrors of the cosmos. The future is just the archetype of the most advanced. That's it. Anybody who wonders about advancement, you will realize imagination is something that can be piloted. You know, it's pretty much the like what really human life is what sort of rhythm the inner realms release into the outer realms. That means how your mind is being you and how your body is being you are like two different worlds. But two different worlds, like two eyes that see the same two dimensions that are being one moment. And so the greatest game of the mind when it is played, which is usually the idea of truth, and the greatest game of the body is played, which is usually the idea of pleasure. So it's as if when these great games have been played, the mind is left with the unknown. It's as if the greatest truth of the known, of knowledge, the greatest truth of knowledge is still in an unknown place. So the unknown is the ultimate truth. Perhaps it may be said to be wiser for the human species to consider that it's an unknown being. Can you imagine that? Imagine they're like, who are you? And the person's like, I'm unknown. As if like a file in a computer written, you named the file unknown. Human psychology is an effort that's going somewhere, you know. And if the future was already here, why would we need to do anything? Because the most advanced being can, you know. I feel like a sort of approach to the future could be, it's like, what is the most advanced decision in every moment of the space-time continuum? And so it's based on our context of freedom and our value system. It's like what a human being is, or what the mind is a sort of self-organizing, a conceptual archive of all the ways excuse me, it has consciously existed so far. It's as if now that our eyes are open to a world, what is the world? When it comes to the future, it's like if every person for a second just closed their eyes and felt as if all the human beings that were gonna be born in the future were like staring at them, waiting for them. It's like the future is waiting for the present to honor the past by using its inspiration to, in some sense, building a future. The idea is that the human species chose a universal archetype. You know, it's like that's still a bit far away right now. It's like we're acquainted with, let's say, the human archetype, but in the future there may come a time where people are just being moments in the universe, as if no thought, no idea, unknown witnesses of the realm, you know. A culture centered around what we don't know rather than what we know, right? Because what we know is being the value we're choosing to, in some sense, capture an image of reality, but it's what we don't know that, in some sense, the truth of the artificial is waiting. For the mind to wonder about the future, it's like pretty much the most advanced event for the brain. To try to solve the problem of the ultimate victory of consciousness. That means it's like, what is the purpose of nature? Could humanity be a phase? Could we be a sort of field of intelligence that never dies, so it is the hidden spirit behind the world? It's like, what are we? Right? And what we are is an opportunity to, once realizing everything is unknown, to discover what the soul is the origin of how your intelligence moves. So it's like an original attention. When you realize that original attention, in poetically it's as if your consciousness is seated beyond your inner realms. So it's as if if the body was a simulation and you awakened from it. Now imagine the mind was a simulation and you awakened from it. That awakening reaches an awakened state. What an awakened state is an unconditional state. So we must not fear the unknown, right? The unknown is the greatest teacher of the creature that has used knowledge to do something, you know? An advanced civilization awaits those that are advanced beings, you know? The era of the advancement of all dimensions of the human species. The whole planet was like, all right, let's try to see how the future, the freedom of the future, can, you know, define the context of the evolutionary animal. It's as if a refascination with the world that was here before our eyes opened, you know. To wonder about the unknown is to wonder about where all knowledge is, the presence of the moment. What complexity couldn't understand, the simplicity was being. True advancement is trusting all dimensions of reality and trusting how they can advance. It's as if we are, for the mind, it is in some sense to ride infinity towards truth, you know. A world so free where the idea of freedom imagined is not necessary. So many versions of advanced civilizations. Pretty much any person who wonders about the future of a civilization can literally write a book on an advanced civilization. It's like the question, who am I, leads us to the unknown witness. The question, who I am, is the trust the unknown witness has in being the moment. It's like the person's like, okay, what do I do after I discover truth? It's like, what do we do post-truth, right? And post-truth would be an advanced state where it's like through the freedom of the intelligence of a greater dimension, a better world was possible. It's like the archaic revival of the unknown eyes of human history. The presence of truth. The presence of truth is how the moment was accepted before any consequence could be interpreted. the future's greatness is just how advanced we could be before attention shifted from what it had been journeying through, you know. It's like, poetically, it's like, you know, a death where the concept of the world is like, how can I tell you? It's as if when the it's like the mystery of our eyes is beyond any fear. So there's just an advanced opportunity. It's like, what else can I say? Thanks for listening, guys. I hope this episode was engaging. Much blessings and knowledge. Rise, mankind, rise.